All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for your patience, and thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be with us today to talk about one of the most salient issues affecting Virginia right now, and that's, of course, the impact of data centers on the Commonwealth, what it means for our communities, what it means for our economic security, what it means for our environment, what it means for our health and climate. I'm Tim Sawinski. I am the communications director of the Sierra Club Virginia chapter. I will be facilitating this as well as monitoring questions and chats that are going on. We're going to be joined by our digital communications lead, who's also our data centers lead. That's Paige Westlink, another staff member, and the intrepid Ann Bennett, who is the Sierra Club Data Centers chair. Does a lot of work on a volunteer basis. And a lot of what you're going to be hearing today is influenced by a lot of our volunteers, but a big deal of it is from independent data collection and synthesis and analysis by Ann Bennett. So really excited for this to happen here. Before we get started, I just want to do a couple housekeeping items. If you would like to ask questions, there is a Q&A box on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. It should be there. This is a webinar, so no one can unmute themselves or raise questions. We want this to be very much a engaging presentation, but also uninterrupted, so we can be respectful for everyone's class. So if you have, time. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat box. We'll be monitoring, collecting them, and we want to get to as many of them as possible by the end of it. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Paige, can you go to the next slide, please? Let's just set the context of this conversation really quickly. We're talking about data centers in kind of a silo away from all the other issues, but it can't be because data centers are kind of overlapping with a lot of the issues the Sierra Club works on. Specifically, how does it affect our communities? How does it affect our climate? How does it affect our lives and livelihoods? You might be asking yourself, what is a data center? If you live in Virginia, you probably already know. But it is essentially large buildings, warehouse sizes, with components of them that are can be pollution intensive, can be extremely heat intensive, which requires a lot of water or other strategies to cool, which are not good for the environment or for the surrounding communities. They're buildings that are filled with giant computers or servers that enable the internet to operate. Now, there's different types of data centers, which we're going to get into, specifically artificial intelligence data centers, which seems to be all the rage right now. And we're moving forward with it as a society without necessarily looking at what the impacts are going to be. So a data center is not a place, is a giant building. Not a lot of people work in them. It is mostly a technological haven for things that enable different components of the internet to work. That's what we're talking about. And if you look at it from that sense, and not in connection to anything else, it doesn't sound so harmful. It sounds like something we need for email and all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, the impact of them is very significant. Just looking at them at a glance, data centers are huge, which means a massive degradation of land. Because they can get so hot, and a lot of them use water to cool, which is water we cannot get back. They consume a lot of water. Some people like to say data centers have a drinking problem, and I agree with that. Data centers, the massive amount of power that they use, was creating a looming energy crisis potentially, where we just do not have enough energy to choose between a data center or powering our homes and businesses, as well as an energy cost crisis. What you're going to learn is that if there's a huge demand in power, that is going to impact people who pay electric bills. Families that are trying to get through the month and have a huge an electric energy burden has a huge significance on their income and their lives. Data centers absolutely impact that. Next thing is increased air pollution. Parts of the data center of a data center, whether it's an AI data center, a cloud storage data center, they have components of them that release air toxins to the air. And considering we don't have any protections right now for data centers, they can be built near neighborhoods, near schools, near playgrounds. That's a huge problem for the people in the surrounding areas, the residents who are on the nearby areas. I mentioned already the water impact of them, the decreased water impact. And then, of course, there's climate pollution. You're going to learn more about why, but polluters are using data centers as an excuse to build a new fleet of fossil fuel plants. This is at a time when we need to be reducing the amount of fossil fuels so that we can have a shot at a livable future. Well, data centers are providing an excuse to ignore those goals, to ignore the salient issue of making sure that this climate is stable, not just for our generation, but for generations to come. So that's a big overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Paige, can you go to the next slide? There's a couple things we want to set up the context. Data centers may be approved on the local level, but that does not make them a local issue. And it's not a local issue because our electric bills are not our local issue. The energy distribution of where people get power and where they can't, that is not a local issue. And also pollution is not a local issue. Pollution doesn't stay in one place. A county that pollutes doesn't mean that there's some kind of glass dome that's going to keep that pollution in that area. And also, not to mention, the climate impacts is not a local issue. The other thing we want to talk about in the context is we hear a lot sometimes where it's like, well, don't you want the internet to work? Yes, but we don't want it to come with a trade-off of sacrificing our economic security or our health. Data centers are not all built equally, and the new trend of artificial intelligence, AI data centers, are more harmful at a significant multiplied amount than your regular data centers that we're used to. And considering there's nothing slowing down about them, we have to take this seriously. The type of data center matters, although all data centers can have a significant impact on our environment, but AI data centers are in a league of their own. And the last thing we want you to remember is that there has been no substantive policy that has been passed by our state, local, or federal government. And that's a huge issue given the significance of this topic. So those are the things we just want to frame the conversation around, just some background things. So think in that context as you learn about these things, because there's a lot of information because there's so much bad associated with this that we want you to remember they are connected to these issues. They're connected to all of this. So with that, we're going to move to Ann Bennett, who has done a lot of original research and data collection, scoured the universe of the internet to find these things. Anne has a very significant and in-depth presentation that we're only going to be able to give a preview to you for today because we want to be respectful of your time. But what Anne has been able to put together is a very good contextualized picture of what harms data centers are doing specifically to Virginia and have potential risk for our nation. So we're going to have, I would say, like, even though you're going to get an in-depth thing, if you want more information on the real in-depth analysis of what data centers do, please contact Ann Bennett. She is a trooper when it comes to giving presentations across the Commonwealth, legislators, communities, decision makers on all different types of levels. Please use her as a resource because there's very few who are as good as her. So with that, Ann, if you want to share your screen and get to your presentation, please go ahead and I'll start monitoring the chat.
All right. Let's see. All right. Thanks, Tim. That was a really nice introduction. Can everybody see the first slide? Yeah. Good. So I just want to reiterate Tim's great introduction. This is really not about our cell phones anymore. This is about very, very sophisticated and resource-intensive AI applications. And we've really put the cart before the horse. We've done that. We're moving ahead with these market forces without really planning adequately. And of course, the Virginia taxpayers and ratepayers are partially, if not significantly, on the hook for this. It's all about artificial intelligence, the build out in Virginia. I just like to share this. Cloud HQ has a huge campus in Loudoun County, and their motto is where data lives. And that is true. Virginia is literally where your data lives, where the cloud lives. And it is increasingly living close to us and among us. And you can see here on the right, this is a new Amazon facility in the Sully district in Fairfax County, right next to public ball fields. And so these data centers are being built everywhere, anywhere, without too much protection for local residents. Why is that? Because we have the fiber here, we've had cheap energy, we have very lax state policies and localities that want revenue from these buildings. So that's really what the calculation is. This is really why Virginia is in a unique situation. We predict that we could have at least 300 million square feet of data center development, about 2/3 of that in 4 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia. 300 million is the equivalent of 45 Pentagons, which I believe remains the biggest building in the world. As I said, we haven't planned. Tim mentioned an energy crisis. We have not put regulation on the books, particularly compared to what our what nations in Europe have done. We have a huge build out of infrastructure. We ratepayers and taxpayers are going to pay for it, and it's really time for effective public policy. And that's why the next General Assembly, or the next two, are so important. Just want to mention that Amazon is a major portion of the market and a major impact on how much new power we're going to need. They have very big claims about sustainability in Virginia, but we really haven't seen the data to support that. And as the biggest client statewide, we think they have the biggest responsibility of delivering clean energy and fewer impacts, both land use, energy, and water. We have fiber that goes from Virginia Beach, so that also across for all of these cloud services. So that also is a big part of the reason they are in Virginia. On the right is a brand new building, another Amazon. Amazon, as I said, has the biggest part of the market in Virginia. It's going up in Springfield, so it's not just Loudoun County anymore. We could see as many as 900 to maybe 1,000 data centers in Virginia. And these are data centers that are much bigger than the old ones and consume far more power, have more servers, and are really being asked to do much more. Gives you a sense of the breakdown here on the right by the top jurisdiction so far, although this is changing quickly. And here on the left, you can see a playground right next to diesel generators in Fairfax County. That's not hooked up yet, but on its way quickly. Very quickly, you can just get a sense of how many, these are just a few of the projects in Northern Virginia, a few as we go down the 95 corridor. You can see how many are Amazon. These are massive campuses for the most part, some as big as 19 hyperscale data centers. And then, of course, down even south of part of Richmond and south of Richmond, particularly in Mecklenburg. This gives you a sense of how much power we are expecting them to consume. These are a smattering of approximately 1 gigawatt campuses. So campuses that are going to require new power that is, 2,100 megawatts. And these are just the big ones, not the small ones. So just by these few projects, we know the floor of how much power will be needed. And then nationally, we are not alone. We're looking at numbers 35, 47, 100. We've seen massive changes. We've been talking about this for a couple of years, and now I think the newspapers and the consultants and Wall Street has certainly caught up with the increased demand on its way. Virginia is expected to allocate down the road 40%, not Virginia, Dominion, 40% of its power toward data centers. Right now, we're somewhere around 21 to 26% of all of our power goes to data centers, and it will be 40%. So pretty shocking. One new data center of the hyperscale version that's all they're building right now basically is the equivalent of about 50,000 homes. So when all of the work that many of us have been doing to clean the grid, it is an incredible uphill battle, as you can see. We're not going to talk about generators. So carbon is certainly an externality of this business. And I just want to, relate to you that in 2021, Loudoun County, which is the leading county so far, their emissions were already up 50%. So we, that's only going to rise as they continue, and all the, up to whatever, I think it's about 26 jurisdictions in the state who either are or will be in this business. This is a Google facility in Loudoun County. It's not open yet. We actually don't have data around it, but we do have data about Google in Europe, where they are 98% hourly carbon free. That's a far cry from what is expected here in Virginia, and is certainly something we'd like to see happen. I just wanted to share a graph from PJM, which is on the right, which is the grid operator for the 14 states in our region. And to show you that the increased demand for power in generally is completely aligned with the growth of the data center industry. So while other sectors are slowly reducing their energy load, the other data centers have gobbled it all up and more. So this is really all about the data centers. Here on the left is a new graph from Dominion's latest IRP. It goes to show you from 2021 to 2024, demand is revised often, sometimes more than once a year. And you can just see how much that peak is increasing. And that, again, as I said, is from data centers. We also, with that, is a 5.5% annual growth. And Dominion has proposed an all of the above approach, like fossil fuels, nuclear, clean energy approach to meet the increased demand. One measure of how fast the build out is happening is that Dominion expects now it could be up to 7 years before a building can get hooked up to the grid. So challenging environment for the industry, and certainly a challenging environment for the state as well. Just to show you on the right side how much of that demand is in the rural cooperative zones and how much of it is Dominion. Again, all these projections go up literally every time some new data is dropped. What do we have to pay for? Part of it is transmission and distribution lines, and that is literally all over the state now for data centers, not just in Northern Virginia. Substations on the right, you can see substations and data centers surrounding rails to trail in Loudoun County. That's just become the norm. Here's some of the lines that have been proposed, some of which have been approved already. And just to give you a sense of the equivalence, we are going to need more than 25 gigawatts per the new filings, but if we did, 25 gigawatts is 28 new coal plants the size of the Clover Power Plant in Halifax, or 15 new North Annas, or the equivalent of 83 small nuclear reactors at 30 megawatts each. So, we're talking about incredible amount of power and new investment and cost for Virginians moving forward. And some of this is certainly reintroducing coal from West Virginia in a way that we certainly did not expect or intend. Just to, Sierra Club has a new report that sort of puts the onus or invites the industry to be helping all of us solve this massive energy demand problem. So invite you to take a look at that. And I'm just going to just also some pictures in Loudoun County to show you, particularly on the left, how big these buildings are now. And that's basically the new norm, 3-4 stories. They're building up and out from a land use perspective. And then on the right, you can see how close they are to where people live. Here, same thing. Just very quickly, I'm not going to get deep into water, but increasingly, as Tim mentioned, data centers require, since the servers run hotter, due to the artificial intelligence applications being very different than the, watching Netflix or, chatting with your relative someplace. They cannot air cool these buildings, which was the industry standard. They are now moving to some liquid or water cooling. That puts a lot of pressure on, for sure, in Northern Virginia, but also throughout the Commonwealth, where groundwater is being tapped. Farmers are concerned, so we're setting ourselves up for a competition for water, which is finite resource. Loudoun County is showing us, always leading the way, showing us that reclaimed water use is way up, potable water use is way up. And we're going to either have to, and by the way, 6 out of 7 of the top users in Loudoun County are data centers. So we know that this trend is what is in force and increasing, and we have to plan that every jurisdiction needs to think ahead about the water impacts. I'm gonna. I just wanted to share on the right too. I think Paige can talk about this, but on the right is a water agreement in Spotsylvania County with Amazon, between the Amazon and the county, and you will notice that they block out how much water how many gallons that Amazon is contracting for. So even though water utilities are public utilities, we do not have the information in order to adequately plan for the huge amount of water that these data centers are requiring moving forward. So I just thought I would share that, because very hard to solve a problem if you don't have the information. So I'm going to turn it over to Paige, but that gives you, and happy to answer questions later, that should give you a very quick, very dense overview.
All right. Thank you so much, Anne. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and as always, that was an amazing overview of such a complex issue, and does a beautiful job of putting it into terms that we can all digest, and putting the true, statistics of what's going on out there in a way that's understandable for us. So always appreciate that. I'm going to step in here and talk more on the people side, which Anne touched on. But what's really going on here that is a big deal for us as people are these costs that we are taking on that we really haven't had a say in or any sort of participation in as we should. As Tim said in the beginning, there are no safeguards in place for people or the environment in Virginia, on the local level and the state level, but also federally too. So, I mean, we're the data center capital of the world, and yet we don't have any safeguards in place for people. And so what I'm going to talk about is kind of what that is turning into in our state, and what it's looked like, and how those impacts are coming to fruition. So one of the things that I know Anne had mentioned a couple of these things, but one of the things that we're highly concerned about is that in Virginia, Dominion just came out and said that our electric bills will be doubled by 2039. Something that we know about Dominion is that a lot of the time these estimates on what will happen to our electric bills are far under what they actually end up being. So we know that it will most likely be a lot more than doubling of our electric bills. And the reason for this is data center development alone. Because every time we have a new data center proposal in Virginia, every time they come online in Virginia, they sign a private contract with Dominion to get energy from them that we cannot see, where they set their energy rate. And then we have to pay for the energy they need for that project. So in Virginia alone, Dominion has said, we need a new fossil fleet. We need a new fossil fuel fleet to power data center demand. Well, 110% of the costs of a fossil fuel plant are passed on to your electric bills. So, for instance, the Chesterfield gas plant is a proposed gas plant that I hope a lot of us have heard about, because the community has done a really great job of making it public. They are opposing this. or, a group of the community. And the reason is because they are putting a gas plant where it was initially proposed in an environmental justice community, which is a mostly low-income and Black community in Chesterfield. And this is a project that is set to cost a lot of money. I think that for the Chesterfield gas plant alone, it was $600 million last time I checked. So that money for just that one gas plant is passed on to our electric bills. We have to pay that. And then the 10% I talked about is that we pay the 10% interest on it. We pay that for Dominion because they essentially get a tip for building this fossil fuel plant. It's unfair to ratepayers, and it's something that we need to be more transparent about in the coming years about what's coming onto our electric bills. So that's one way that we are paying for data center development is we are paying for their energy. And we truly believe that people shouldn't be paying for big tech's energy needs, especially when they have the revenue to pay for these things on their own. And we should be pushing that in a big way as a state, and we haven't been at this point. The other way that we pay is we pay when coal plants stay operational. That ends up on our bills. So as Anne talked about, we are keeping coal plants open beyond when we said we would retire them for our, pollution-free goals in Virginia. We are keeping them online strictly because of data center development in Virginia, but also in West Virginia and in Maryland. Now other states are being affected by our own rush to be, the data center capital of the world without having safeguards in place and without actually understanding the true impacts of what this expansion is going to look like. So yeah, these are just some of the costs and the true prices that we look at when we're seeing data center expansion in our state. And when data centers are built, they come with diesel generators. That's mostly how they're built. Most data centers are built with diesel generators on site. It could be hundreds of diesel generators. These are not the diesel generators that you turn on when there's a hurricane and you lose power. These are tractor trailer sized diesel generators, and they emit toxic pollutants. As Tim talked about, we have data centers that have been built directly next to people's homes. In Fairfax, there is a mobile home park that is directly adjoining an Amazon data center who just got approval to double the amount of diesel generators they have on site. So when we talk about the pollution as the result of these diesel generators, we're talking about pollution that is directly impacting communities some of the time. And we also know that pollution doesn't stay in one place. Yes, it's horrible when it is next to a community, but whether it's next to a community or not, that's affecting everyone. That is something that, we can't even see it a lot of the time because it is, as I have on here, PM 2.5. That's particulate matter that you cannot see. That's pollution. Those are toxins in the air that you cannot see that we know are linked to health effects in people, especially children and especially our most vulnerable populations. And it leaks other things. Diesel generators leak other things like arsenic and benzene, which we know are toxic to our health. The pollution from diesel generators, they're linked to high rates of cancer, cardiovascular, and respiratory diseases. So now we're talking about data center expansion affecting our health. We're talking about data center expansion affecting the future for our children. We're talking about a Chesterfield gas plant being built next to a community. We're talking about very real life serious impacts to our future that we had little to no say in because they were rushed for approval. And because a lot of the time they were done through processes that allow data centers to come in and get what they call rezoned as, industrial, and then they don't have to go through public approval. So that's why we are where we're at. And these are the impacts that we're seeing on the pollution side to our health. And then I know I talked about this more, but a little bit, but just to reiterate, we are paying them in many, many different ways. So we pay for their services. I use Amazon Prime. We pay through our electric bills, which I talked about a little bit before, how we pay 110% of the cost for their energy build out. We're paying with our health. Like I said, there are very serious health consequences of diesel generation. There is very serious health consequences to a fossil fuel fleet build out. We pay in state tax subsidies. I think, the state tax subsidies are up to $1 billion last time I checked. They are getting everything that they want, and people are not getting anything that they need from this data center build out in Virginia. And the reason that we really love to highlight this is because we do have an opportunity to fight back in Virginia, but we also serve as an example of where we can get involved in other states to ensure that, this doesn't happen and that we can really zone in on the areas that matter most to people. The tax subsidies that it was vetoed, but I think the reason that this is important to bring up is because it shows that in Georgia, they actually ended up suspending what we give to data centers because they saw what happened in our state. That's enough to show you that we aren't doing what we need to do to ensure that people are protected. And in the end, we're paying them in so many different ways. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. But yeah, I mean, it's important that we talk about the health and the real cost of what this data center expansion looks like. So I'm going to pass it on to Tim. That was just a quick synopsis, and hopefully we can talk more about this during questions too. But thanks, everybody.
Yep, thank you. Actually, there was a couple slides at the end of our page we could
Oh
put
yeah,
up.
sorry.
That's okay. I want to say to everyone, I have done my best to answer your questions in the chat as we've been getting them in. I'm keeping some of them up there now so that we can get to them right after we're done. We're done here, which is close. And again, a lot of the policy progress is made by contextualizing every topic in a way that speaks to people and speaks to our elected officials. And the best way to do that is about illustrating this in the idea of fairness and justice, right? Like, and if you really look at this, let's zoom out for a second, get away to the specifics. But what all of that combined together means is that Virginia itself is footing the bill for the world's internet access. And right now we're really footing the bill for this AI race. We're paying more than anybody. And in context of what that looks like for our families, well, in 2023, according to the Census Bureau, 29% of Virginians had to forego paying for basic goods so they could afford their electric bill. That is choosing between keeping the heat on in the wintertime or paying for food or medicine or gas to get to work or insert issue here. That is a choice people already have to make. A large portion of our communities have to make, and data centers can make it worse. So maybe in the next 2 years, it won't go up by 50% or 100%, but it will go up by $20. That means the difference for a lot of these folks. And it's not too much to ask that we're protected from that, especially when the tech companies are as rich as they are. There's other side of things that we've already talked about, like the environmental justice aspect of this. Big tech refuses to acknowledge the fact that they're being used as an excuse to build new fossil fuel fleets. And it's not just in Virginia, it's also happening in Tennessee, and it's happening in Georgia, and it's happening in Arizona, happening in Michigan. Like, we have climate energy goals because we want to have a livable future. And we're sacrificing that for the sake of AI. And Pedro already mentioned, Chesterfield plant, the original proposal for that was less than 2 miles away from a community center in an area that was 25% below the poverty line and predominantly Black. And then, by the way, that area already had to live under pollution from a coal plant for 80 plus years. Those are the areas that we choose to build that fossil fuel build out. That is there because of data centers. And that's not us claiming this. This is what the utilities themselves are saying. Data centers require this kind of build out. Those people pay taxes too. Those people pay electric bills too. What's happening to them being targeted in that area just because of where they live, they have to deal with more pollution. And again, it's because of data centers. There have been a question in the chat, as well as some, a lot of big tech will say is the silver bullet. That's the small modular reactors, this new form of nuclear technology. The thing about that is it doesn't work, or at least it's never been proven to work. South Carolina spent $3 billion building an SMR, and all it could do was turn on. It didn't provide power, just turned on. That's something that their ratepayers have to pay for. Small modular reactors have been proven to work in a lab, not on a utility scale. And in the last General Assembly session, our state legislators passed a bill that says if they want to experiment with SMRs to create power, regardless if they provide that power, customers have to pay for them. And the way that our utility regulatory system works means that we have to pay for not just 100% of that, but 110% of something that may never provide power. SMRs are not the solution, at least right now. And mention this, and this is huge, transparency is sorely lacking. We don't like one data center in Henrico is not going to be the same data center in Fredericksburg or Caroline County. And part of that is that the non-uniformity is, and why we can't get to a point of uniformity is we're not allowed to see what the operations of these things look like. The operations of a data center, how it's constructed, how it provides power, how much power it consumes, that's all hidden from us because it's between a utility that's a private organization like Dominion Energy and a private company. That's not covered under the Freedom of Information Act. And with respect to localities, they're not necessarily equipped to understand the significance of the build out of what a data center looks like. And look, no one's blaming localities here. These things offer revenue. They dangle revenue in front of the localities and say, "This is look at this. Now you're going to be able to fund your school's lunch system, or pay your teachers more, or lower your property taxes," which they claimed would happen in Fairfax, which, by the way, and it never did. So this is just trying to illustrate this as we all are connected when it comes to the data center issue. Another thing that we've learned about more recently, this AI idea, artificial intelligence, what we have right now is just the training phase of AI is a good way to think about it. It's machine learning. It's using us as guinea pigs to train it so that it becomes something better. Once it becomes something better, we'll be charged for it. It's only free right now because we're doing free labor for big tech to train its AI. And they're not paying us for it, but they are just starting doing it. And maybe you can say, "Oh, I just won't use ChatGPT." Well, if you Google something right now, it gives you an AI response. It's getting harder and harder to avoid artificial intelligence that we're paying for, that communities and families are suffering for. So again, if you wrap all this up in here's the claims of AI and here's what's actually happening, the claims aren't necessarily manifesting in a way that is fair or just for Virginia's families. Let's go to the next slide. So you might be like, okay, well, this is your Sierra Club, your bias, all those stuff. Fair, fair, fair. But there are industry claims that we've heard over and over again that I think are worth providing the entire context to. We'll go to a stakeholder and say, maybe you should use on-site solar and battery storage instead of diesel generators for backup power. One claim they say is well, it's just backup power. They do turn them on periodically. You have a field of tractor-trailer-sized diesel generators, and those are turned on throughout the day. And right now, there's no safeguards to say you can't turn them on at these hours or this time or etc. So that toxic pollution Paige was talking about that actually mostly impacts children and vulnerable communities, those are running. They're running right now. But you ask big tech, they'll say, well, what's the business case for doing that? We're going to have to spend more money on it? Yeah. If it means one kid's not going to get asthma, yes, you can afford it. Because at least the estimated generation, because we don't necessarily know the total revenue, but the estimated revenue from data centers in the United States alone is $100 billion. That is not acceptable to say we can't afford something when it comes to protecting people, families, our health, and our livelihoods. I mentioned this already, from the IRP to other utilities from the Dominions, which is, their 15-year plan, they're all using data centers as an excuse to build more fossil fuels. And what's frustrating for us is big tech has this idea that they claim they're climate conscious, that by this year we'll be completely fossil free from our operations. But if you're being used as an excuse to build new fossil fuels, you should say something about it. And more than that, industry has a lot of influence on public policy. Right now, there has been absolute silence about Dominion saying we're building fossil fuels because of data centers. If you have a climate conscious commitment, you need to put your money, your literal money, where your mouth is, and that's not happening in Virginia right now. It's not happening at the federal level either. Data centers don't create long-term jobs. And it's hard for me to say that because I understand the importance of construction, but because these are giant warehouses, you're not building a huge infrastructure, electrical stuff, it's not going to be long-term jobs. And barely anybody works in a data center. So the economic promise of job creation, that really falls short if you look under the hood. Yes, the construction will be there. It's temporary. But ultimately, the technology might evolve and you're not going to need these big warehouses to do it. So now you have giant buildings with nothing in it except for old servers or they don't have anything to use. And maybe the state incentives or the tax incentives get better in Georgia, so they move everything there. Now you have a locality that pushed away a lot of land, that sacrificed a lot of revenue to potentially to help incentivize them to come, and they just got up and left. The economic claim again is not long term. There's no longevity in the context of this, and big tech will say these things are getting smaller, and they will within the next 10 years. So it just doesn't seem responsible planning if we're just hanging our hopes on one building or two buildings that are giant that nobody works on. They'll also claim that they build clean energy in other states. Paige had this great quip when we were talking about this. Google, for example, builds solar in Arizona. Well, great, but in your data centers are causing the Chesterfield gas plant. So are we just supposed to tell children who get asthma, well, don't worry, there's a solar farm in Arizona that's not part of our grid and that you don't have to benefit from? Now Google's getting better about like what their true cost of like what their power is and where it's coming from, sure, but it's still not good enough yet. And this is the one we get a lot from people who have, I don't think, a complete understanding. Like, well, if data centers are paying electric bills, then aren't they also helping pay for the fossil fuel build out or the new energy build out? Yes and no, because they have contracts with utilities that say we're going to pay this much. Families don't have the luxury of that contract. So in their contract, they'll say like, for me and you to pay, to turn on a light bulb, it might cost us 25 cents. But for a data center, that same amount of output will cost a few pennies. We'd love to tell you more about what exactly that looks like, but those contracts, because they're between two private interests, are secret. We know that they're paying discounted rates. We just don't know what level. And this is where the transparency thing comes in. What are they paying their fair share? By all evidence that we can find, absolutely not. And the way that they could show us is if they make those contracts more available, or at least components of it, key components of it. But that has not been happening. And it's not like we haven't been trying to engage with stakeholders. It's not like we haven't been talking to Dominion and talking to Google and Amazon and Microsoft. We have, but they're not doing they're not fulfilling the reasonable requests that we have for them. This is just important to understand. Like, this is not just us raising a red alarm without trying. We've been trying for years. We're at the point right now where we have to get this out there just to get something done. So I think that's the end. We can end that and we'll just go to questions. If that sounds good to everybody else. Is there anything else, Paige or Ann, you wanted to add? Cool. All right. So I'm just going to go with questions as far as I can get them. We have 11 open questions in the chat. And I also recorded some on a Google document. So I want to go with the first one because I think this is the most relevant. It's one of the first questions we got from someone who is actually a planning commissioner in Harrisonburg. And it reads, the city will soon be considering amending our zoning ordinance to allow data centers by special use permit. We're very familiar with this practice. It's going on all over Virginia right now. Are there model zoning ordinances for data centers that they could read? Anne has some modeling things, so please take it away, Anne.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I really appreciate that the city is taking this up. First of all, really glad to hear, at least it would not, sounds like wouldn't be by right development, because that's really the death knell for those of us who want to encourage localities to require energy efficiency and renewables and noise abatement and all sorts of things. So and that's been an uphill battle in the state, but we have worked on this extensively. There is not one jurisdiction that has really done it right, meaning we, particularly the big ones, Prince William and Loudoun, have yet to act, basically, although I think Loudoun is on its way to doing a few things. Fairfax just updated its ordinance and really did very little. But I would be happy. We do have a list of local suggested initiatives that some are policies, some are ordinance specific, but I'm absolutely happy to share that with you. And also, share what we've learned from the experiences in the four big counties in Northern Virginia.
Yeah, this is a good point, and I'm glad to, and thank you very much for being part of this webinar. We appreciate anyone who is in a decision-making position to attend this and learn more. I will say, before data centers were kind of a Northern Virginia urban issue, now it is really spreading out to AI because the size of these campuses, some of which will take the equivalent power of a small city, that is not an exaggeration. They're going to rural America. They're going to rural Virginia specifically. So, getting more information about this is crucial because they're just kind of rolling in and they get rubber stamped because, industry does this regardless. And look, they're money making machines. It's part of the system. I understand that. I'm not saying these are bad people, but their goal is not to look at what happens to people. Their goal is to make money. Fine. Well, acknowledge that's the reality. But what that means is A lot of them come in and say, here's all the good, but look over here, don't look over here. That's why nonprofit advocates, we're not getting paid extra bucks to do this. We're just trying to do this because we want to make sure that people are safeguarded. Our insight, especially someone from Anne who's not paid at all to do these kind of things, is very legitimate and important. So, and I know Anne, you're always willing to talk with planning commissioners or legislators about this issue too. So, if there's anyone else in this call with that kind of power, please reach out to Anne. She knows everything that I think you need to be equipped with before to move forward. Next question: will residential electric bills have a special notation on bills that break out additional expense from data center power demand? And will consumers be given prior notice of electric bills going up as a result of data center demands? So I answered this a little bit in the chat before answering it, but the short answer is pretty much no. Dominion electric bills, which is the majority of Virginians have those. They have line items on their bills. Well, at least they used to, but that constantly changes. There's no uniformity for it. In fact, 3 months ago, the line items had broken down cost by like different projects for this power plant, for this transmission line, for this solar plant, and then kind of grouped everything else together, like fossil fuels. One of our biggest complaints is that the fuel cost, which is the second most expensive line item, that's natural gas. It's not explicitly stated, but that's natural gas. And that actually went up by $20 in 2022 because of the war in Ukraine. So that's just something to note it. Now we don't have that kind of thing. We don't have that. They're all kind of grouped together in different sides. So we can't rely on the industry or utilities to just be forthcoming about these things because there's no regulation that says they have to do it in this certain way, which would be maybe a good idea for a legislative item. But yeah. And then, yeah. And will you be given prior notice? The State Corporation Commission is in charge of accepting requests to increase bills. They have an email listserv, and maybe you'll hear about it in the news. But it's not like you're not going to get a text message that says, hey, just so you know, your bill's going to be $50 more this month because we had to include line items for all of the costs to build essentially power for data centers. Does that track with both of you as well? Cool. All right. What restraints on data centers are most crucial? What should we ask for legislators in the upcoming General Assembly? And you want to take the first crack at this?
Yeah, so we had a bill in the last GA sponsored by Rip Sullivan and Subramanian that tied those companies who receive tax incentives, subsidies, to meeting certain energy efficiency metrics. I think absolutely that is incredibly important because the energy we don't use is really the most important energy, the stuff we don't need to build for. So, and they haven't been asked to do much of anything. There are a few data centers that build to a LEED silver level, but LEED silver in data centers doesn't mean what it means for residential anyway. So, that's a huge missed opportunity. I would say that we would want to ask the state to allow for the best available technology for diesel generators. To what Paige's point was, is that localities cannot regulate clean air and can't require the best available technology, which would be tier 4 generators. And when we're talking about tens of thousands of diesel backup generators coming our way, we have over, I don't know, at least 5,000 now in the state. And it could be 20 to 30 backup generators, 20 to 30,000, sorry. Eventually, that is a huge opportunity to at least make them put in the best available technology. So I would say those are two really important aspects. I think a discussion about the rates. Do data center operators get their own rate category down the line? What's their responsibility? How much infrastructure do they pay for? And then the concept of, and we've seen some movement on the renewable side where they do procure their own power, and we're seeing much more of that in the nuclear space right now. Paige raised a good point that really needs to be in the PJM area in order to help Virginia and our neighbors. But the companies do need to be required to be responsible for delivering their own clean energy. That should not be on the backs of Virginians. It's too expensive, it takes too long, and we are not really being served by this industry. This is basically a pass through industry serving their private clients around the world, which it's great that they do that, but they need to pay for the both the backbone, the infrastructure, and they need to make it clean energy. So I would say those would be my sort of my top four off the top of my head. But it's complicated, and unfortunately, there are many things that need to happen in order for us to protect Virginians.
Thanks, Anne. Totally agree. I mean, it's kind of at this point we can just use as much as we can get from the state because it's just so much going on. All right. So next question is how many data centers using or proposed to use SMRs? So right now, no data centers using SMRs because of what I talked about earlier. The technology is just not there. How many are proposed? I believe Dominion had 5 proposed SMRs in their integrated resource plan, which is like their long-term plan they have to present to the state. And we have to pay for it, whether they work or not. So you can make your own judgment if that's fair. It's not fair. I'll just say it. It's not fair. Um, so question. Yeah.
Prototype.
Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, sorry. I would just say that the prototype that's gotten some attention lately, where Amazon has made a down payment to help with the cost of it, literally a down payment, is in Louisa County. So one could expect, but who knows for sure, that if it is viable eventually, the technology is viable and the cost platform is, that could service the two major Amazon campuses under development right now in Louisa County. So I just an extrapolation there, but because they are mobile, they can be inserted should they work in neighborhoods. They can be inserted anywhere the data centers are. And as we, I think, showed earlier, more of these data centers are encroaching upon where people live and people work. And we have to have a public discussion about whether we want small nuclear reactors near residential communities and, frankly, near communities at all.
Great. Can/are we lobbying for alternative fuel source, maybe clean energy for the diesel generators, at least some of them, if not all? Paige, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, so last session, we actually had a chat with Google. They had reached out to us that they wanted to talk about, well, we reached out to them and they agreed to meet to talk about legislation. One of the things that we asked them about was including in our legislation, putting backup battery storage that would be clean energy on their data centers. And we brought it up again to them in another meeting. And what we were met with every single time was this response of what is our financial gain? What is our business argument for doing that? And so after I told this to Tim, Tim said, well, the business argument is children's health, children's lives. And, I have to empathize with them that they are coming from a business perspective and that we come from totally different places with our goals. But they do claim this 100% clean energy and that they are pushing for it. And I mean, it's impossible to get to 100% clean energy by whatever, I think they claim 2030 if you have diesel generators on site and we're building gas plants for you. But you have a solar farm out in Arizona. I think Tim talked about this. So the short answer is yes, it is our goal to have clean energy as backup power. But the big tech industry so far has not been super cozy with the idea, but it's something that we would like to see, and it's really, in our mind, the only way that they could get to 100% clean energy is if they have those two.
Great. Um, Here's a political question. Is the Sierra Club going to oppose candidates in the 2025 election, particularly governor, if they accept Dominion Electric or data center provided donations? So I'll answer that since I work on our political side. You know, I don't know. That's just the reality of it. If everyone's taking money from both of them, we have to deal with the cards we've been dealt. And then when it's not session and it's not elections, we try to deal more people in. But that's just the reality. If we can influence people, and look, I've worked on the state legislator side for over 10 years. Yes, I do think money has a corruptible influence. Yes, we've seen it. That does not mean that money is an automatic yes for whatever the industry wants. And I'd rather be at the table and have some influence and make sure that we're influencing their perspective as much as we can and as when we can. Sometimes taking a stand feels good, but it doesn't get us anywhere. And I'd love to live in that world where we could just say no. We're powerful enough that like we're not going to endorse or oppose candidates one or the other another. So I can't say yes, can't say no. What I would say is be patient with us as we try to navigate this in the most realistic sense while still holding on to our optimistic, idealistic goals, because that's sometimes what we have to do. I'd rather take the path of progress every time than not being able to than just sitting back and letting the pieces fall as they were. So what that looks like, I don't know. I don't know. And we have a political committee that evaluates these things and endorses people or works with people based off those things. And it's a misnomer that we don't work with Republicans. We do. And it's a misnomer that we're nonpartisan, so that means we don't take a stand on anything. Being nonpartisan means we get mad at both parties. So I hope that answers your question. Is it realistic to think that renewable energy could meet their needs, or is the data center need too large to fulfill without fossil fuels? And that is an excellent question. And I think you're probably most qualified to answer that.
Well, I'm going to say the math is tough. I think it requires the amount of power. First of all, there really has not been any public conversation about how much is too much, about whether, to what extent should we power artificial intelligence applications, okay? So, and I'm not judging on it, but I mean, I do think there is a place in the public domain to have a conversation about, is there a limit to how much power we can um, um, literally allocate to this one industry at the detriment to others? Are there limits? So I'd say that would be the first step, that the General Assembly begin, because right now there are no brakes on. It is build as much as you can, no limits, and it puts the clean energy transition at risk because it is very hard to come up with that amount of power in one place. Now, data centers are going up in other states like Georgia, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan. Like they're going in other places, but with us taking up 70% of the market, it puts huge pressure on. Um, so maybe that ultimately is our limit, is how much clean power we can have, as much and as many data centers as we can find clean power in our grid to service them. I don't know there, but it is an important question. But the right now, for sure, in the short term, we cannot meet that need for as quickly. The buildings go up very fast now. It is that's part of the problem. It doesn't. We're not talking about a fancy building. We're talking about concrete walls with a bunch of servers in them. And once they get entitled in the land use process, they go up very quickly. But we cannot get frankly the energy and the clean energy fast enough to meet their needs. And that's why there are data centers sitting idle, ready to go, sitting idle in Northern Virginia, even while new campuses are built throughout the state. So we really believe when we said a crisis, that's part of it. It's a planning crisis. And Dominion is required to meet all of their customers' needs. But what is reasonable for Virginia going forward, and when is too much literally too much? So I think we are in a challenging position, and Dominion certainly has not offered to meet the demand with clean energy. They are offering a lot of fossil fuels, and particularly natural gas, and that's worrisome from a carbon perspective.
Couple of important things to note too. Energy demand in a lot of states is going down right now, and that's good because not just good for our climate, but it's also good for people's electric bills. If you're using less energy, you're paying for less energy. The states that see energy increases are the ones where the data center industry has a foothold, and California. So that's it, and which is in a league of its own, and that's too complex to get into right now. But that's just something to think about. If you don't have a data center burden, especially the largest data center burden, which Virginia has, then energy demand is going down. And this is another important point, and just touched on as well for people who are in local decision-making moments. Dominion has already said that any new data centers are going to have to wait at least 7 years. And if you approve a new one now, you're going to be in the back of that line. So it could be 8 years, could be 9 years, could be 10 years. And if you believe some of the things the tech industry is saying, well, these are getting smaller, it's getting more efficient, you may end up sacrificing a bunch of land, having an empty building, and not getting the full revenue from it because the tech industry decided, actually, this project's not good enough. We want to abandon it. Because it's more incentive where they're incentivized more, whether it's because of technology or better tax incentives to go somewhere else. Which is why we to say we're anti-AI is not accurate. But to say we're anti-reckless data center development that we have seen at the levels in Virginia, that is accurate. So it's just something to think about. Your new data center will not get power potentially for a whole decade, which means you won't get the full revenue for that long. And yet you might have sacrificed a bunch of land and a bunch of money to serve the area to make it ready. And that could have been farmland, that could have been green space, that could have been places to incentivize smaller businesses, which maybe don't sound as flashy or give as much revenue, but it diversifies your portfolio. And that's more long term. It's just localities tend to think of localities tend to think of data centers as like, this is a great way to get a bunch of revenue all at once. What happens when that revenue goes away? We know what happens because we've seen it with the coal industry. The economies are depressed, people leave, people suffer. So it's just something to think about. Um, how do we encourage people to decarbonize in the face of exploding energy rates? So this is a good question. I believe it is offered, and please add to the chat if I'm being wrong, in like the personal sense, like what is our carbon footprint? And I would add to that, um, you may have heard the statistic, one ChatGPT search requires 10 times the amount of power as a Google search. Yes and no. Like that's, I think, a little bit uncontextualized. Like that power is being built anyway. The difference between one of your cloud storage data centers where the energy ebbs and flows, because like when you're not streaming, we're not sending email, we're not on Zoom, like the energy goes down. AI data centers have processing power that's 100%, 100% of the time. So that power already exists. So when we talk about like personal impact, yes, you can avoid using it to maybe create less of a market, but that takes an incredible amount of people. What people on an individual level must also be doing is pushing for policy change. You know, a few people can make a difference. If we present these arguments to policymakers when they need to hear it, it's not just enough to be right. We also have to be compelling, or else it's not going to change. So, talking about how this affects our lives, how it's not fair, how it's just unreasonable to ask Virginia to pay for all of this, that's what our elected officials need to hear so that they actually do something about it because we don't have any protections right now. Nothing of substance anyway. So, if that answers your question, I don't know if anyone else wanted to add to that. Looks like no. Okay. What are the economic benefits, if any, to Virginia? So we talked about this a little bit. It's revenue for localities, which is why a lot of people say stay out of this. It's a local issue. We've already kind of addressed why it's not. But um, Anne or Paige, do you want to weigh in on this?
Um, I could say I think that, in the areas where we're looking at the areas that have received a lot of this revenue that they're talking about, like Loudon. I spoke to somebody who lives in Loudon who's a volunteer with us, and she was telling me that people are actually leaving Loudon as a result of 14 years without a day of no data center construction. So data center construction for 14 years straight. And so it's, the argument there is we have this local revenue, but I don't know if the people that we're creating this revenue for are going to want to stay in a place where, especially in the rural areas, we're losing their generational farm. Maybe a substation is built right next to where they live. And so I don't know if the benefits really outweigh the costs at this point. And in a lot of places, I would say that they don't. And like Tim had said before, it's similar to the coal industry. I mean, we have an industry coming into localities, becoming their singular source of revenue, and they have no promise to stay. And where does that leave a locality when they've been relying on that revenue for however long? So,
So I would just add that there are short-term jobs associated with data centers, no question about it. There's construction and pipe fitters and things like that. There are also the labor also is able to maintain long-term jobs because these facilities get retrofitted and they need to be maintained. I think the labor is already integrated into the industry. We have a lot of it here already. That is certainly a positive. Um, but the costs, I mean, if we do a real, if we weigh all of the costs, which I think the JLARC study, we're expecting them, the state is studying this issue right now of the impact of data centers, and we're certainly hoping they're not just looking at the benefits, which they have done in the past, that we'll get a better sense of all of the different externalities and how they impact us over time. Um, so uh, Definitely some positives. I think we didn't talk about it here, but the land use implications over time are massive as well. We're talking about, well over 100,000 acres, maybe far more. It's hard to quantify that. That is now going from forest land or farmland into industrial development. So, I only share that because the landscape is changing for better or for worse, and there are implications to that as well. And long-term costs of a shrinking of this industry, I know, I think Paige talked about this, or Tim, what is the cost of that as well? So these are not long-term jobs. Amazon is only required to deliver 1,000 permanent jobs under its agreement with the state. 1,000. That's not very many. That's highly unusual. So while there are some jobs associated with it, not what you would expect for an industry that is having this level of impact.
A couple things to underscore this. 67% of Loudoun's inner revenue comes from data centers. And considering there's construction on a whole bunch of new data centers now, that revenue impact is going to go, it's going to increase. It only can increase. And if and when the data centers decide, sorry, technology no longer needs this much space, what's Loudoun going to do? Second thing is there are claims from the industry, and then there's enforcement. Amazon says they're going to have 1,000 permanent jobs in Virginia. Well, Microsoft, I believe it was Microsoft, excuse me if it wasn't, but one big tech organization tried to do the same thing, and I think it was in Idaho. I know this was a state where they promised a data center campus that would have 300 permanent jobs. Four were created. What happens when they don't? If we don't fulfill the 1,000 jobs, like what do we do? Slap them with a fine? There's nothing in our agreement that says what we'll do if they don't fulfill that. Just something important to remember. That overpromising and underdelivering has been the case for fossil fuel plants in the fossil fuel industry, and it is that we have reason to doubt or reason to believe that it's the same thing with the tech industry. All right, so good questions. There is a newly created org, Virginia Connects. Yeah, we know these guys. That is sponsored by industry stakeholders and mailed out to flyers. What do you know about this organization? We know a lot. One thing I will say about this organization on a positive note is that the work of Sierra Club, PEC, and a lot of other Piedmont Environmental Council and a lot of other organizations are the reason for this. Is because we've done a very good job at educating the public on don't just look over here what the data center industry is looking at, look over here. There's also harms that are being associated with this. And if we look at it in a contextualized sense, we may not be sure it's worth it. Virginia Connects is just the political arm of the Data Center Coalition, which is a group of stakeholders, Amazon, big tech, other data center like industry stakeholders. That's what they're doing. They're pushing back because of the narrative we're providing, and they're scared about it. And they honestly should be, because again, these arguments that we're making to you all, we have not gotten any satisfying answers from the tech industry. Like they have not answered them. And so they can't answer them, so they create a political organization. Yes, they're sending out flyers and text messages. We've received them that say data centers are going to have, if you look at the notice, it's all ambiguous. It's crucial for healthcare, jobs, education. They don't say how and they don't say why. And the thing is, we can talk about the short-term construction jobs, we can talk about all of this stuff, but what good is all of that if our electric bills go from $150 a month to $300 a month? What good is that for the communities that have to live to literally hundreds of diesel generators every day? What good is that for the community that has to live right next door to a data center and they have noise pollution going on 24 hours a day? This is the thing. Those flyers don't mention any of that. So Virginia Connects is a political arm of the data center industry. It is a way to present a narrative that is not contextualized, and it's a way to make sure that they can have some cushion for the General Assembly session coming up, as well as just like capturing the minds and hearts of the public as much as we can, which is why we're very proud of you all for coming here to get the full context. And maybe you disagree with us, and that's fine, but the full context is not being presented by the industry. Anyone else want to weigh in on Virginia Connects?
No, I think that was beautiful, Tim. I know that we are 15 minutes over, so I just really wanted to appreciate those that have hung in there with us. It's a lot of information to try to condense in a short amount of time. Ann and Tim have done an amazing job. I just want to let everyone know that if you need to go, please feel free to hop off. I know that we also have a hard stop at 1:45 for our panelists here, so I just wanted to call that. But yeah, we really, really appreciate you making it today. And just being here is honestly the first step in us really addressing this problem. So shout out to all of you for taking the time, especially at lunch. Thanks for spending your lunch with us.
Yeah. Yeah, it is 1:45 right now. So, as you all can see, we're really hyped up about this, but I'm serious about reaching out to Paige, reaching out to Anne. They're here as a resource to you. If you want to reach out to me, I'm just going to send you to one of them, but I'll be happy to talk with you all about this. But yeah, our information is on sierraclub.org/Virginia. You can reach out to us all that way. Also, you can respond to I think the registration thing had a follow-up email that goes to Paige. So we wish we could get all of your questions. We're sorry. This issue is so dense, but it is important. It is significant. So yeah, Paige, you don't have the final word. I just want to add that in there.
I said my final words. Anne, do you have any final words?
No, just appreciate everybody sticking with us with this complicated subject and agree we're all here to be a resource as best we can with what we know.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have enjoy your day. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.